Leadership, the action of leading a group of people or an organization. Sounds simple, right? It's not, especially during turbulent times. My name is Randall Palm, and over my 20+ year career, I've been blessed to work with some of the great leaders in the industry. I've seen many leaders take teams and organizations to new heights, while others have struggled to empower, reward, and foster a culture of diversity and inclusion. Over the past year, leaders have been challenged like no other time I can remember, from external forces like the pandemic and social injustices, to the implications of these within their own organizations, which in some cases has completely changed or accelerated their business model. As we navigate the waters of these changes, I wanted to talk with people I consider innovative leaders about their approach to leadership, how they've applied that experience over the past year, and what they've learned. All right, everyone, welcome back to the pod. Today, I'm really excited to have Tom Harvey. Tom is currently Senior Vice President and CIO of Alkermes, a publicly traded biopharmaceutical company that focuses primarily on central nervous system diseases. I've known Tom for a number of years now and really always appreciated his perspective on topics ranging from the pharmaceutical industry, what's happening in that specific area, to general trends in the marketplace around kind of technology, to just life in general. I've always appreciated Tom's perspective on things. So Tom, I'm really excited to have you on today's podcast.
Oh, this is great, Randall. I appreciate you having us.
Yeah. So Tom, before we get into the meat of kind of leadership during turbulent times, I thought it'd be helpful to maybe have you share a little bit of your background with everyone leading into that topic.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. I grew up in a little suburb outside of Richmond, Virginia, Chester, Virginia. You get to see it every time you drive to Florida. There'll be a big sign, and you can stop at our Wendy's.
Is there a picture up there? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, my mom was so proud when they put in a Hooters where the old Howard Johnson's was. So it's, Virginia, it's a place to be. But I went to school at Virginia Tech and studied information systems and accounting, and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina right after college and started working for Deloitte. And soon after that, I think I was there for about 3 years, and then I joined Abbott Laboratories at a manufacturing plant in North Carolina. Had the opportunity to move around with Abbott a little bit and found myself in the Northeast when working in the medicines products division, which kind of became their diabetes division. And we were out in the Burlington area for a while, and then ended up at Alkermes in IT back in 2005. So it's been a ride.
Yeah. So that's a long ride with your current company. Maybe walk me through, were you in leadership coming into the organization? Did you you've obviously, I think, you've been there a long time. I'm sure you've moved up the ranks over the years.
It is a long time for one employer. And
I've been in Alkermes for 20 years, so I can
exactly. If you got a good thing going, you got a good thing going.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. My days at Abbott, I probably thought I would retire from there because I was there for almost 17 years before. Before that, and I did have a number of opportunities there. And when Abbott moved their diabetes care business out to the West Coast, I'd already moved with them 4 times, maybe 5 times. And I just realized for me personally, at a career standpoint and with my family, the best choice was for me to kind of take my chances in the newly focused life science part of the Boston area. And a few months later, I started at Alkermes, and I was I guess I was the senior most person reporting to the head of IT at the time. And he had been there for 8 or 9 years. And so I came in, we were both at a director level. He soon got promoted to vice president, but then left the organization. And I had the opportunity after a few months of transition and just kind of working through what exactly Alkermes was looking for in a leader and what I was looking for in a job. I was really grateful to have the opportunity to step into the head of IT role there as a VP. And we continued to grow. At that point, the company was probably 500-600 people. We were preparing to launch our first product. Our product that we had developed was launched by another company for a while, and we were bringing it back in-house. So soon after I'd taken over the role as the head of IT, we ended up with a commercial team. We ended up moving out to Waltham. It wasn't long after that we merged with Elan's drug technology business, and doubled our size to about 1,200. And now we've grown to about 2,400 employees worldwide in a number of different areas. You mentioned the central nervous system activities that we do, and the medicines that we work on there for really vulnerable populations, like super vulnerable populations, especially those dealing with substance use disorder or serious mental illness. But we've also expanded into a number of oncology assets, and we're really excited about the work that's happening now with our Nimvalucan Alpha product, and have made a number of announcements over the past few months about how we're continuing to expand that program. So there's a lot of great changing things at Alkermes. So through the years, I found I got the CIO title, and then a few years after that, I got the move to senior vice president. So I've had a really, really wonderful career there.
And that's a lot of, especially going from an organization that's growing so rapidly. Your leadership style, have you seen it evolve over that? Is it, are there certain things you kind of picked up along the way? Maybe, Tom 10 years ago versus 5 versus today.
Tom 10 years ago scares me a lot. Tom scares me almost as much. But I think that was one of the fortunes that I had in my time at Abbott, because I moved between a couple of different manufacturing plants of different sizes and different complexities. I had the opportunity at Abbott to run their internal audit for IT. So I got to see a lot of divisions within Abbott, a lot of different business models, visit a lot of different locations, countries. So I kind of understood the complexity of the international front. It was a very federated model at Abbott. So I think as a result, I got exposed to a number of different styles of business. So moving from the diabetes care division, that was probably 400 or 500 people leading IT for that, and moving into Alkermes, was a little bit more I guess I was just a little prepared to do what you got to do. And a lot of these companies, when you move into those jobs the first time, you're changing the paper after the month-end run for putting in the green bar paper. That's what I remember when I came out to the Boston area. And when you go to Alkermes and you don't have a big corporate team to rely on, you start to rely on more vendors, and you have a little bit of a scrappier approach to how you get things done.
Yeah. How would you describe your leadership style today? And we'll get into kind of the last year and some of the challenges that we've faced, but how would you describe yourself as a leader today, given all that background at Abbott, big company, a lot of structure, to Alkermes, a little bit more smaller, more nimble, probably incorporating some of that process as you've grown, right? And leveraging that. But how would you describe yourself today?
I'd like to think that it's adaptable. I think it's always been important to look at what the role of IT is in the business through the lens of the business. And, it's pretty easy when you're, I always say that as IT people, we were beat up a lot of small children. And so, we want to kind of fight our way to that seat at the table, or we want to fight our way to relevance. And I think the key is you're relevant if you align with what the business needs and ultimately is looking for. So there's going to be always a little bit of healthy tension as you move back and forth to say, okay, actually, I think we need to move in this direction and we should really invest here. If you feel like you're more of that order taker and just kind of being pushed down in, just do what I say because that's what I say. But I think you have to earn the respect. And one of the ways that you earn the respect as an IT leader is to really understand what's important to the business and make sure that you align all of your objectives, not for your theoretical view of what an organization should be, or not what a vendor's telling you to do, or what Gartner or Forrester has told you how you ought to approach your team. I think you have to look at what's important to the organization, how's your team responding to it, and then how do you fill in the blanks and approach the voids.
I mean, I've been on a handful of calls with your team. I've always been, it always seems like you there's a real humbleness to you and a real, looking to your team to help make decisions and make sure they feel empowered, and kind of almost diverting, a lot of the positive, hey, I really rely on them, that it's their decision. It seems like the culture of empowerment, surrounding yourself with great people, and kind of an authenticity and a humbleness that I think people.
It's interesting. I appreciate that. I think that there's a time where that becomes a big weakness, though. I think that there's times where you are also faced with more of a command and control need, or you need to step in and just say, this is unacceptable, and this is what we're doing, and this is what's important. I have not had to do that as much in my career, and I don't know. I'm not 100% sure why that is. I don't tend to be a slash and burn type of leader. I drive a lot for consensus building, but that also takes a lot of work. And I think there's also times where you recognize you can't lead through consensus alone. You have to. I think you have to chart that course, which goes back to the point that I made, that if you really align IT to the business, the priorities sort of show up for you. The right thing to do shows up for you, and you got to take some chances, and you've got to push through some items that can make you and your team more successful, or ultimately invest in some things the business don't understand are completely important, but they are, and they're kind of table stakes. So I think our job is to manage that. But I've also been fortunate to work for employers that let me have that latitude, that allowed us to come in, understand what was wrong, and then try to fix it if it was something that was broken, or try to build what we need. The biotech industry, in some ways, we're so far advanced in technology and science, but when it comes to core IT, not typically so much. And part of that is our regulated industry, and the fact that we rely so heavily on our quality folks in computer systems validation to make sure that we stay compliant. And as much as the FDA says they want us to innovate, and as much as the FDA says they want us to be, leading edge in how we make this stuff, in reality, they want it to be exactly like what they've seen before, so they can agree that this matches everything they believe and is in control, and allow us to move on.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of really good. I mean, one of the things is, I think if you surround yourself with great people, you don't have to be that authoritative figure.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think, my assumption is, because you haven't done that, is a reason why you haven't had to, take that approach. I do think that the higher up you go in an organization, the business, you start to understand the business requirements a little bit more, and that becomes kind of the, maybe a manager, first line, second line. They're, not that the blinders are on, but they're kind of focused on their piece. And if there is discrepancy with the business, my experience that is, as long as you explain why, we're not doing, here's why, and explaining the why behind things. I think that, the people that, again, those good people behind you that you're rallying around, I think they kind of get that, we talk
a lot more about the business than we talk about technology, in my staff meetings, and in the town hall type sessions that I have with the all IT group, because I think it is so important. The technology is relatively easy at the end of the day. It either works or it doesn't. You have good partners or you don't, and you can find a way to work through that. What tends to be a little bit more difficult is the process and people aspects of it, or that kind of wrap around it. So I think if you put the business first in that context, and think about how do we meet what the objectives are. So, at Alkermes, we've been at a point where I think it was right after I took over as the head of IT. We were doing a lot of work for Johnson & Johnson on their inhaled insulin program. And we helped them build a plant in Chelsea, and we were hiring up, and, we were moving to really advance that program in phase 3 trials, spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on this program, mostly J&J's money. And then they just decided they weren't going to do that anymore. And so we found ourselves in a situation where we had to lay off about 40% of our workforce in Massachusetts. And
Yeah.
you know, and those are painful. And so if you think about what you were doing in that build mode 12 months before versus what you've got to accomplish over the 18 months that are going forward as you're redefining your business strategy, as you're looking at, you know, you're not licking your wounds, you're looking forward all the time in terms of how we can make difference in patients' lives. But I think you have to go with kind of where the business is. So, you know, as we were ramping up from that 1,200 to 2,300 employees, we were hiring a lot of people, we were spending a lot of money on technology. Our budget started to you know, really expand because it was about building that level of capability, and it was about sort of building for the future. And as we've seen our business shift a little bit over the last year and a half, where it's become more important to make sure that we're being really diligent and deliberate about how we're managing our allocation of capital and exactly what we're prioritizing and within the business, and looking for ways that we can drive efficiency. You know, you start to put on the brakes and slow down things a little bit and become a lot more measured and deliberate, and start to deal with all the technical debt that you've built over the last 5 or 6 years when you were in growth mode, to go, okay, I don't actually need 3 different VPN platforms that are still kind of turned on and are probably not going to yield us a good benefit.
Yeah, I think that idea of, you know, kind of this concept of leading through turbulent times is actually a book about that goes over 4 presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, and Lyndon B. Johnson, of all people, and kind of the juxtaposition of his domestic policy, which he was kind of well known for, versus his international policy, foreign policy around Vietnam.
No, I actually haven't. I have heard of that book. I haven't read it, but I probably need to put that on my list because
it's a really great book. It chronicles kind of, there's 3 phases. So, you know, early childhood development, kind of their younger years into their rise to power, and then really kind of what was their defining challenge, right? And how do they deal with it? And it's, you know, you think of some of these presidents as if they've never had any challenges, you know, personally. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was on suicide watch for a year, you know, like a long, you know, after he, you know, he didn't deliver on some promises that he had made to his local constituencies based upon, you know, things outside of his control. But it's really interesting, and they all have. I mean, think about it, you know, Teddy Roosevelt and Lyndon B. Johnson came in to their presidency after the current presidents were assassinated. Talk about turbulent times in leadership. And so the idea of being a leader, not only as you're going from 600 to 1,300 to 2,400, but as the business pivots and you're trying to motivate and inspire, let alone just, you know, say, hey, we're still here. Let's, even though we just took it on the chin, we got to go. Because if you don't, then there's going to be more layoffs, right?
Sure.
So
and it's really easy to recruit when everything's going awesome and you're spending a lot of money and people see, you know, all of those opportunities. So at this point, you know, we've sort of shifted to the point that says, you know, hey, we recognize that as we go through this pivot and as we reposition ourselves for really, really high levels of growth, which we have done before, you know, there's a piece where you kind of draw on leading with empathy, and you you know, you don't try to pretend it's any different than what it is, but the upside is so great, and the opportunities that you can create, even when someone who's a really high performer goes, you know, has a great opportunity somewhere else. I've never been the person to sort of chase them and try to talk them out of a decision they've made, because I feel like they've made that for the right reasons. And if they think, if I feel like they've made it for the wrong reasons, that's maybe a different conversation. But you know, I think you support people through their growth in their career, and then you look around and say, how can I actually now advance the team that I have into being even more effective? And then how do I find a way to creatively backfill, or possibly not backfill, a role that actually puts someone else on a trajectory of growth and opportunities going forward? So I think you just kind of take what's there and make the most of it.
Yeah, I think I tell people on my team, if you're chasing a passion, good luck. Don't chase money. Don't chase, you know, make sure that, you know, you're doing it for the right reasons, because there's always a job where you can make a little bit more, you know, or whatever. at the technology, if there's something there that really is, gets you inspired, then, more power to you. Kind of on that note of turbulent times, let's get in the Wayback Machine for a year. This time a year ago, COVID hits. What are you thinking? What are you doing with your team during times of, I've been using the term uncertainty. People don't like uncertainty.
People do not like uncertainty.
And I would argue people don't like it, and everything doesn't like it.
Not to shift where you're going, but one thing I would insert is that I think as leaders, our number one job is to try to give people as much certainty as we can about what they can expect, even if that is a little bit of uncertainty. So, I think we can't be victims as leaders. I think we have to kind of lean into to what we know and what we don't know. And if there's a lot of uncertainty, then you want to lead with a way that gives you a little bit more flexibility and gives you that opportunity to shift when you need to. And so I guess I'll let you finish your question as it relates to COVID, but I think it is really critical to recognize you got to lean into it.
Yeah, no, I think, and having enough answers, to your point, to make everyone feel a little bit more comfortable, but not, if you don't have all the answers, I think the idea of saying, I don't have all the answers, what I know is I'm here, we're here. Actually, I think work provided some certainty for some people, as much as they had a place to go, they had people to talk to.
They didn't have to worry about whether their next check was coming from, or if they could pay their mortgage. I know it's a big deal.
Right. And, in certain industries, that wasn't the case. In certain ones it was. And so for us to have, a CEO, a leader, HR, constant communications around what's happening and bringing in people from around the world to say what's going on in Italy, we had what's going on in Singapore, in different markets that maybe were a little bit ahead of us. I think that's where that we did a pretty good, and just that we're there, we're a rock, we're gonna, it can be, I think you could look at it as a real galvanizing opportunity for your team. And so I think, but the uncertainty piece, I think that's, to your point, people aren't comfortable. So if you can provide, to your point, some level of certainty, as best you can, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think, going back a little bit to the question that you were going to ask more about, how did we respond to COVID? I think we responded, like, for the most part, how every one of my peers, of everyone that I talked to in IT did, in terms of, I think we all did what we needed to, and largely IT has come out as a, I don't want to say winner in the situation, but
an enabler, right? Enabled the business.
Definitely an enabler. And I think there was maybe an additional appreciation, as we probably have said in multiple formats, about how we had put things in place already. So we were able to support remote workers. We were able to have the right level of investment on security tools and different levels of capabilities. Many had already moved most of their applications to the cloud, which lended itself for a little less disruption or a little less clogging. Of course, we can't really control what's happening with your Verizon Fios or your Xfinity cable going into your house when suddenly your neighborhood is overloaded, right? So we had to deal with a lot of that kind of piece. But I feel really blessed to work for a company that kind of has an operations mindset anyway. The fact that we do our own manufacturing, we kind of have that level of structure in place that we can call in when we need to. So we actually mobilized our cross-functional, kind of what we called our COVID crisis management team several weeks before we found ourselves at that kind of, first, second week of March kind of standpoint. I think within February, we were looking at it at the time primarily around the supply chain. I think that was what was driving some of the very early discussions in terms of looking at what might interrupt the supply chain. But it didn't take long, probably by the second or third meeting, it was very clear that there were three primary objectives. First and foremost, the safety of our employees. How do we make sure our employees are safe? And, I think most employers took that approach. we see a lot of the bad actors maybe that got put out in the news in some of the industries where maybe that was less of a priority. But I feel like for our industry and certainly for Alkermes, it was paramount. And what we also knew is, kind of going back to the earlier thing, which I said sort of our second area of the supply chain, we knew that we've got very vulnerable patients. Like I said, in that space of if you're dealing with substance use disorder and you're dealing with serious mental illness,
right,
and the products that we actually market and sell in the United States for the patients that could benefit from them, we needed to make sure we didn't interrupt that. If they needed to come in and get another dose of their medication 28 days later, we needed to make sure that medication was going to be there. So our manufacturing plants and supply chains, functions that were driving those pieces. Going back to the first one, we knew that the way that we could get that supply chain situation managed best was to ensure the people who had to be there were safe by getting the people who didn't have to be there out of the office. So, it quickly became a function that because we had so many fewer people on site and that were really required, it was a little bit easier to implement some of those protocols. But if you remember, we were kind of making it up week by week, which kind of goes back to your communication thing. So fortunately, we had that crisis management team that was meeting at least 3 times a week. That was communicating to employees at least every couple of days, as we started to focus a little bit more on overall business continuity and how long will this last, when we all realize that this isn't going to last just like 3 to 5 weeks. This is probably going to go on until June, or it's going to go until September. And, where we are now a year later, where it continues to drag on. So, we really focused on the business continuity aspects beyond that to just make sure that we didn't have a level of interruption. So employee safety first, not interrupting the supply chain for the patients that really rely on those medicines, and then business continuity is kind of how we drove it. And then specifically in IT, back to something you were talking about earlier with the book on the presidents, the way we handled that uncertainty is I just scheduled a 30-minute meeting once a week every Friday around lunchtime. And I think we ended up moving it to Thursday at lunchtime because as we got into the summer, people tried to take a little more time off. But we just met for once a week to talk about whatever. Like if I had news to share, I'd share the news. If we'd gotten a memo from HR the day before, I'd reiterate what was in that memo. And we just kind of check in with people. And we maintained that through most of the summer. And then have done a little bit less and maybe have moved into probably a little bit more of a regular meeting cadence as people got more comfortable there and there was less uncertainty and there was less meaning but our team's meeting tomorrow for a little Cinco de Mayo lunchtime. I'd like to be happy hour, but I don't think it'll actually be happy hour at lunchtime. But our folks in Ireland on our team will be ending their day, and it'll be around lunchtime for us in the U.S.
Yeah. It's just, I think the idea of, taking care of your people, I think is somewhat, kind of table stakes, right? I think that's, I think first and foremost, I do think that this idea of leadership is, how do you find those galvanizing points? How do you rally around certain things? And gosh, if you're in the supply, if you're providing medicine to people who need it, that's a real easy thing. Not easy, but it's
it's pretty easy to rally around.
Yeah, and I think that as you think about leaders, it's how do you build these rallying cries that are kind of memorable, that are easy to get to grab onto, that are inspiring, that are motivating, especially during tough times. I think, again, if you look back at the leadership during Turbulent Times book and other examples, how do you find those things to grab and to make really and define them with the team so they can, it kind of reduces the noise and it creates a real kind of a North Star that everybody can get behind.
A terrific leader for a while when I was at Abbott, who ultimately became the CIO for Abbott for a few years before she retired. And she really, I think, taught me to leverage and build on the strength that I had already, probably around empathy, that if you built those relationships with people, and if you took care of them when they were having turbulent times, when you gave that employee that extra amount of flexibility, or you let someone coach their kid in on a sports team and gave them a little bit of extra flexibility before we would ever talk about workplace flexibility. You know, back when paternity leave was 3 days, I think, as opposed to
back when it wasn't trendy and you know, back when it was like you actually were doing it for the right reasons, not because you know someone in HR is saying, hey, you know, we're getting a whatever on Glassdoor because we're not flexible enough.
Yeah, but I've forever told my people, hey, you know, take the flexibility now because you need it. Like your family needs this. You as an individual need this. You know, you have a health issue, you have a logistics issue, whatever it is. Do what you have to do to take care of yourself. And you know what that equates to is a team that then is ready to give that back to the business when they need it. So when we hit a turbulent time and they have something that's difficult, even though they were juggling, you know, so many people on our team were still juggling those family obligations. We're struggling with grief because, you know, they had family members that were affected by COVID, or they were scared, or they didn't really know, you know, there was so much uncertainty for so many people. But, you know, I think what we also realized is if we had a real issue that we needed them for, they were there, or if they couldn't be there, they had a coworker who truly wanted to step up kind of on their behalf. And so, you know, we consistently had people filling in the blanks, but we also consistently tried to lean into what was important to those particular individuals and the crisis that many of them were leading. I have the luxury of, I'm sitting in my basement in Provincetown, and you know, in terms of our Boston residents, I think this weekend when we did some traveling to see a friend for his birthday, I think that was the 8th or 9th night that I've actually slept in Boston since mid-March of last year. But I also, you know, my kids are grown, and so I feel like I have it better than most because I'm able to just try to help and manage through what I need to. But I also know how stressful it is, even though I have it so good.
Yeah, I think empathy is a big one. I think that recognizing that everyone's in a different spot, you know, whether you're living in a 400 square foot apartment and you're single in Boston, whether you've got a newborn, whether you've got, you know, kids who are 6 and 8 who need your attention for school, whether you've got, my kids are in middle school, high school. So I'm kind of with you where I got to spend a lot of time with them, which wasn't the worst thing in the world, you know, and whether they're off in college and they're coming back, or I think that empathy that everyone deals with things differently. Everyone grieves differently. Everyone's in a different situation. And in just knowing that you, as best you can, understand it and are there for them to offer them whatever flexibility and support that they need. Because I think there's a tendency for type A type personalities, when you have a hurdle, you just tackle it.
Absolutely.
And not everyone can, or that's the way that they're, there's a little bit of, let me get my arms around this thing first and rationalize it. And then, I mean, everybody has, so I think that empathy, the way that how do you engage with certain people in different circumstances? That's one of the things that I've, through COVID, through a lot of the social injustices that, that kind of kicked off last spring and summer, learning from others and trying to, offer a forum or just an ear for them to talk to and be a sounding board where appropriate. I think all those things are really, as a leader, when you have the ability and have, the means to support, to provide, to, those things, I think to your point, it comes back in spades later on, right? When you've done that. And
we have to set the example. I knew people needed time off, but people wouldn't take time off. And it was a weird thing because, even though they were burned out in some instances, people didn't really want to take their time off because they didn't have anywhere to go. So I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier of, in a way, work gave people a little bit of purpose in that time of uncertainty, and people didn't want to burn their vacation or waste their vacation if they couldn't actually do something that was fun. And I remember one woman was so hilarious. She was like, "You want me to take a day off so I have to clean my kitchen cabinets?" Like, I don't want to clean my kitchen cabinets. Like, but that's.
Well, I had a guy, a friend of mine, he's in Sydney, and he lives in a small apartment. Like, yeah, I'm gonna take a vacation so I can walk across the hall. Like, I'm going to go out to my balcony for vacation. So we were joking about that, but no, it's all good. Yeah, I know, Tom, we're kind of running a little late on time, and I appreciate it's been an awesome conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours on this one. Kind of in parting, thoughts, recommendations, books, blogs, pods that you listen to that that you might recommend to people, or kind of takeaways for them on, from your perspective.
It's kind of interesting over time. The way that I've wanted to kind of consume that information has shifted. I had to laugh a little bit when you dated yourself, probably, but not nearly as much as you dated me, when you talked about kind of employee empowerment. Early in my career, I was really hungry for those leadership books, and it was all about employee empowerment and Great and Zap and all of these pieces with that.
That's a great one. If anybody hasn't read Zap, it's
it's got to be really dated now, because it felt a little dated.
It's so many. A guy gave this to me. He's like, "You're gonna think I'm crazy, but you got to read this thing." And I'm like, "All right." So if you haven't read Zap, it's a good.
But so I think at that point I was looking to really build my philosophy on leadership, right? And to kind of come into my own in terms of what I do to be able to advance my career from a management perspective and leadership perspective. And then as I broadened my IT responsibilities and, suddenly was running a security team or an infrastructure team reporting into me, or, specifically in pharma with the folks that are so close to the science and really helping to enable the research. As those responsibilities broadened, I really spent a lot more time in technology rags and research white papers, and just really looking to round out those gaps. The last few years, I haven't spent as much time on that. I mean, in some ways, I'm going a little bit back to leadership as we think about leading in, as you would say, kind of turbulent times. But I have really focused a lot on periodicals and papers and news feeds, back to the reason that I believe that the business is what's going to drive IT, and we need to really understand what's driving the business. So my interest in the markets, my interest in tech companies and what they're doing as it's reported from, the New York Times or Boston Business Journal or the Globe or Wall Street Journal. Like I subscribe to all of those, and I didn't 5 years ago, but I subscribe to all of them now. And there's times where I maybe skip them a little bit, but I feel like, for me right now, the more I know about the business, the more I know about what's sort of challenging the business, the more I feel like, I understand what's happening. So a lot of times I'm reading kind of industry stuff of pharma too, that it's just kind of giving me a sense of that. But, for COVID, my best subscriptions were America's Test Kitchen. But
there you go. Yeah, learn how. Well, whatever. Well, I mean, it's certainly an opportunity to have a little time back, right? To learn something new. I think talking to Bill Mayo, he's learning Portuguese. Why not?
But Bill's way smarter than I am.
No, well, I don't know about that, but I think I think there's a time and place to read books to learn things, and it's probably when you're kind of getting started and you're hungry for that. I think you ultimately settle into your style, and then that style, I think it gets you where it gets you. You know what I mean? Like I had a guy that worked for me in India, and he moved up to this director role, and he was such a great, everyone loved working with him. And but this director role was going to be this really hard, like the guy before was very, cut and dry, and everybody was kind of afraid of him and everything else. And he went into that role and tried to be that guy. And it just, it just blew up, and it was like, who, like, what happened to, and he was trying to be someone that he wasn't. And I do think that, and that may end up being, hey, you become a CIO, it may be your director, it may be that leadership's not for you, and so I think there is this kind of like skill set that a little bit of natural ability, a little bit of, you kind of round it a little bit more. But man, I've seen a lot of people come into roles and leadership roles and try to be someone they're not. I think authenticity, if you're trying to, be, a hard ass, but that's not your MO.
Yeah,
that doesn't work. And it's not fun, and it's not, it kind of falls on his face. I mean, people see through it, and I think that's, maybe where you are is like, I got my now I'm rounding off other parts, which is
And the last year gave me a great opportunity. I mean, you talked about sort of the events from the spring and summer, and kind of the idea of the whole woke kind of concept. I mean, I'd like to think that I'd always focused a lot on diversity and inclusion, but I've learned a whole lot. Even as an openly gay man and a CIO and on the exec team of our company, I had a lot that I needed to continue to learn and kind of reconcile in terms of the fact I love stereotypical humor, and at what point does my stereotypical humor actually create an environment that isn't the environment that I would want to be known for. So it's fine if you can get a laugh, but then you realize it actually wasn't fine. You thought it was fine because you got a laugh, but it actually wasn't fine. So, books like How to Be an Anti-Racist was something that I kind of gobbled up quickly last summer and into the fall to just really look at that perspective and understand that. And it's an area where, Alkermes has been investing for a little over 2 years in terms of really being much more intentional with that. So the timing of what happened last spring was good for us in terms of we had a foundation to build some of those conversations off of, and we've continued to do it. I mean, we hosted a Pride at Work event earlier today where we had a speaker from Greater Boston PFLAG come in and a youth speaker talk about their experience as a trans person in a wheelchair at college, and it's just, I think, kind of building off of the empathy, but also building over how do we just make sure that we've got the right workforce and we take care of people. Yeah.
And I think those are things, again, not to get turbulent, but when the business isn't going well, those are easy things to put on the back burner, real easy to put on the back burner. And I think it's as part of leadership is not allowing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Those
are core to what we're doing. And just because business is down and we're, those are still critical, not just for work, but for lots of other reasons. So cool. Tom, it's been awesome talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time. And any last parting thoughts before we go, or are we all, you good?
I am great. I'm excited about the summer coming up. I'm excited about being able to get back in the office at least most of the time before too long. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Randall.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Have a great rest of your day.
You do the same. Bye.